The president has fully discharged his constitutional obligation. So it's a really simple proposition in my view. Now it's up to the Senate to do the same. As I might add, the polling data shows the American people expect them to do.
Vice President Biden calling on the Republican-led Senate to consider Judge Merrick Garland's Supreme Court nomination and give him an up or down vote. We're now back with the panel. All right, so I want to play a little bit of what Joe Biden said about the similar situation, about these circumstances, back in 1992 on the Senate floor. Just listen and decide for yourself.
President Bush should consider following the practice of a majority of his predecessors and not name a nominee until after the November election is completed.
All right, George, this week he spoke about this. He said there is no such thing as a Biden rule, but the reference back to those remarks is a bit tough for him and the administration.
There wasn't a Biden rule until Republican leaders decided to take his pronouncement as ex cathedra somehow and to suddenly worship Biden's theories on this stuff. Consider the case today, this week, of Jerry Moran, very conservative senator from the conservative state of Kansas. He said we ought perhaps to have hearings. I won't vote for him. We got 54 senators, we can vote him down, but have the hearings, discuss the place of the Supreme Court and the American regime, its role supervising democracy and all the rest, and then vote on it. And he's now being denounced as a rhino, Republican. And
Let me talk you through a little bit of that so people know exactly what he said. He said earlier this week, I'd rather have you complaining to me, apparently talking to constituents, that I voted wrong on nominating somebody than saying I'm not doing my job. The response then from the Tea Party patriots was, quote, it's this kind of outrageous behavior that leads Tea Party patriots, Citizens Fund activists, and supporters to think seriously about encouraging a primary opponent to run against Senator Moran in the August GOP primary. He then put out a subsequent statement saying this, I am opposed to President Obama's Supreme Court nominee and this administration's attempt to put another liberal judge on the Supreme Court. As I have said since the vacancy was created, I believe I have a duty to ask tough questions and demand answers. Kirsten, he's not the only Republican cracking the door open to at least a meeting.
Right.
Some of them a hearing.
Yeah, and look, John Roberts has said, you know, Supreme Court Chief Justice has said that he's concerned about the process of how we are now selecting our Supreme Court nominees.
But I do believe he said that before this whole Garland thing
I'm sorry,
came
he's
up,
not talking about this, but he was talking about the fact that they've become, on both sides, it's become very much a party line vote where it didn't used to be that. And he said we're not, it suggests that we're not looking at their qualifications. And I think that that's what's going on here. It's just the idea that you would let this person come up, you would assess their qualifications, and then decide whether to vote for them or not is now considered out of bounds.
But I think what conservatives are upset about is that there shouldn't be a different set of rules for Republicans and a different set of rules for Democrats, and that's what's going on here. For dozens of Republican judicial nominees have been denied hearings by Democrats during election years. We have Biden's comments before. Chuck Schumer of the Senate, the senator from New York, has said something similarly more recently. President Obama himself wanted to filibuster Justice Alito's nomination. So I think I don't have a problem with holding hearings either. Hold them and vote no if you don't want him as the next Supreme Court justice. But at the same time, let's make sure the rules apply equally to both sides.
But I don't understand. If you look back to Kennedy under the Reagan years, it was a Democratic majority. They approved him. I think Alito, I think Justice Roberts, I could go on. These Democratic majority
Those were
in the Senate.
election year.
No, but I'm saying a Democratic majority gave a Republican president his nominee. And I think that going into this situation, you have people saying somehow that the presidency has already ended prematurely. I don't know where that is in the Constitution. That seems to me to be in direct contradiction to people who say we want to play by the rules, by the Constitution. This president is obligated to nominate somebody, and you can reject, but it seems to me the Senate is obligated to consider. Refusing to have a courtesy meeting, I think it's rude.
Joe Biden considered every nominee that came before him.
He did, but there are...
It's just not, it's being mischaracterized. He actually went on in that to say, if the president sends someone up, we will consider this person. I mean, so this idea that there's this Biden rule where you don't,
during an election year. But he said the president shouldn't even nominate someone. He's taking it back a step.
But if he does, that he would consider it. So he wasn't, that's a very different than saying, we will not consider anybody that comes up. He was saying that he doesn't think that's what you should do. Fine. But if you do, we'll consider it.
I think the far more interesting question is whether Republicans are making a mistake here if Hillary wins the election and nominates someone much further to the left than Judge Garland.
I think that's very much a possibility.
Republicans are making a mistake prior to the election. Public opinion is clearly against them on this. Ayotte, incumbent senators, Republican senators, Ayotte in New Hampshire, Toomey in Pennsylvania, Portman in Ohio, Johnson in Wisconsin, all in for tough races, it looks like. Could this be the margin of the difference if one or more of them loses? The answer is yes.
I got to say, this week, the Little Sisters of the Poor case was argued over the HHS contraceptive mandate as relates to nonprofit religious groups. And it will likely end in a 4-4 split as our best guess at this point. There's no way to really tell. But this is one of those cases that illustrates how critical that 5th vote or this next seat is going to be in deciding someone on the bench. And it seems like both parties are taking a bit of a gamble with this.
Well, I think that's right now, and that's a very interesting case because the Little Sisters say they object even to this conscience clause that allows people who object to that kind of contraception to be part of a healthcare system. But it ultimately comes down to people arguing that an employer can't dictate an employee's sex life. I don't know how it gets settled, but it seems to me it's not.
Well,
it's a fight against Obamacare, and I think this court with Roberts has affirmed that.
I will say that the nuns have said they want nothing to do with dismantling the overall law. They don't want to sign what they see as a permission slip for their health care plan to be used for things that object to the very tenets of their faith. All right. Thank you very much, panel. We'll see you next Sunday.